Hey guys, welcome back to another video on the channel. The two knights defense against the Italian is one of the most interesting and aggressive ways of playing their open games. As you see, I prepared it on my board behind, and now I'm going to bring you one of a few miniature games I've selected from the Abu Dhabi Masters in August in 2025. A very strong tournament that's played in the Emirates. There's a lot of very good events being held over there, above all during the summer. But today, as I said before, we're going to look onto the two knights from the black perspective, and I'm going to show you a very interesting game which you can immediately put into your opening repertoires and start crushing on the boards with this very interesting idea. So let's get into the action. And as I said before, we're going to focus on this very interesting line. And we'll be looking at the game from the perspective of the black pieces. As usual, I'm using the chess.com software, which allows me to have the full names of the players, sometimes even the photo, and more importantly, the times. Here on the left, we can see the times of the moves, which is very useful to get a bit more into the head of the players and understand why the decisions they made, why were they made. So, with the white pieces, Aizenberg is an international master from Israel, a strong player, 24-74, looking to try and get his Grandmaster norms. He started the event very well with 4 out of 5, including wins against 2 Grandmasters, but he went on a 3-loss downswing towards the end of the event and finished more or less according to his rating. With the black pieces, Singapore's #1 player, young Grandmaster, Tin Jingyao, very strong player, who had a more or less okay tournament. He lost the last round against Saruk Maxim, which more or less prevented him of making out a nice event for himself. But he still did a performance more or less according to his rating, so well played by Tin Jingyao. This game was played in the 7th round, and we're going to see how it evolved. E4, E5, knight F3, knight C6, bishop C4, the Italian opening. And here black goes for knight F6, the dangerous 2 knights. Now, if you're playing with white and you're not an adventurous player, D3 is probably your best choice here, just going for simple gioco piano style opening development. But most players with white prefer to play knight G5, which, by the way, is a move you can't play against the Italian. The classical Italian doesn't allow knight G5, obviously because the queen would capture the knight. Something to remember. But after knight to F6, we can play knight to G5. Now, of course, there's a direct hit on the F7 square, so black has to decide how to play against this. Now, there are 3 or 4 different moves, but by far the most important move is D5, pawn takes pawn, and now we want to avoid playing knight takes pawn because of queen to F3 combined with knight to F7. Main line is knight to F7 first, queen to F3, and knight C3. This is called the fried liver attack and is tremendously dangerous, generally giving white a decisive advantage very early in the game. So knight takes D5, we have to avoid playing this move. We can play B5 and we can play knight to D4, the Ulvestad variation, quite interesting. But for this game, Tin Jingyao played the traditional knight to A5, which is the main line, for many, many years. Bishop to B5 check, C6, D takes C6, B takes C6, and here, usually white used to play bishop to E2. Now this move has sort of fallen out of fashion due to modern computer analysis, because after H6, E4, and here either the old bishop d6 or the modern bishop c5 offer black a huge compensation for the pawn. So this line has sort of fallen out of fashion and has been replaced by two other lines. One of them is queen to f3, pinning the pawn against the rook, and I personally enjoy the move pawn takes bishop, queen takes rook, and bishop to e7. I really think this is a very interesting way of playing this line. Very, very interesting. The other move, which is more fashionable now, is bishop to d3. Now, at first glance, this move looks horrible because you actually block the development of your own pieces. And it is risky. It's very risky, in fact. It's not something you should play with white if you don't have a clear idea of what to do. Which, by the way, is what's going to happen to Benny in this game. Of course, the idea of bishop to d3 is against h6. Now we can drop back to e4 with the knight, which is much better than going to f3. However, here, knight to d5 is by far considered the most important move, hitting the knight, and the knight will jump to f4. This is quite good for black. Theory gives the positions equal, but most black players enjoy playing in this position with black, even though they're a pawn down. There's very good development. For this game, very astutely, I might say as well, GM Tin Jingyao brought the novelty knight to g4. Well, it's not actually a novelty, but it hasn't been played so much as knight to d5. And the idea is, again, to hit the knight on e4. But now, if the knight goes back to e4, then we can play f5, which is quite strong, and much stronger with the knight on g4 than on d5. And here, white really has to know his theory, and he has to be able to find the move bishop to e2, which is not obvious at all if you don't know that this is the move. More obvious moves would include moving the knight back to c3, for example, which in fact is not very good. So, after knight to g4, Benny played knight to f3. He played it very fast. He only used 2 minutes, which sort of makes me think that he knows the theory, but in fact it's a mistake. So something went wrong with Benny here. I can't exactly know or say why, because when you're faced with a weird move and you play fast, it's because you've analyzed this move before. So I suspect that Benny had analyzed knight to g4 in his preparation for the game, and then he was confused when the move was on the board and misplayed the knight. Instead, Madelene goes back to f3. He just made a fingerfeller, a mistake with the knight. Of course, now f5 is very strong because we're going ahead with the threat e4. Now, already this position is slightly dangerous for white, excuse me. But I think that if white had castled and against e4 played h3, according to the computer, white is hanging in this position. Also possible would have been bishop to e2. But after e4, the knight has to go back to g1, which is not something we really want to see in the board. This does look dangerous for white. According to the computer, again, he's hanging on, but it's tricky and tough. Instead, Benny played h3, but this is a blunder, because now black gets to sacrifice the knight on f2, very strong. King takes, and now e4. First a check, and e4. And now we're hitting the two pieces, and we're going to get back our piece. Now, I'm pretty sure that Benny had calculated to here, because he hasn't spent much time, and thought that after queen to e2, pinning the pawn, castle, and bishop to c4 with check, he probably thought he was saving the piece. And in fact, he does save the piece, at least momentarily. The problem is he keeps falling back in development, and also his king is in a very bad position. So black has this huge compensation for the piece. The computer already gives black a decisive advantage here, but of course this is something that the players don't know during the game. So the sacrifice on f2, we'd like to call it an intuitive sacrifice. It's not the sacrifice that leads to a forced mate, but Tin Jingyao, with his understanding of the game, realizes that he have a very strong attack for a lot of moves, and white may not be able to sustain the pressure. And that's why he goes for the sacrifice. King h1, knight e1, and we put the queen on f4, on h4, to make sure that white can't move the queen because of the mate on f2. And our threat is basically f4 and f3, busting open the position and winning the game. There is a direct threat, which is knight takes c4, followed by mate. So white has to attend to this mate. He plays d3. Normal, he defends the bishop and tries to get somehow a piece out. So black swaps on c4 and f4. Notice that the queen can't capture the pawn on e4 because of the mate. And that does mean that f3 is coming now with tremendous strength. It's very difficult to stop the attack now. In fact, according to the computer, the best move for white would be just to give back the piece with knight to d3, which, I mean, just this gives us the idea of the dangers of the position. I mean, this is a complete disaster for white. Just one variation to show how bad white's position is. So after f4, white did his last chance to bring the knight out. Another very strong move, bishop to g4. The bishop can't be captured by the pawn because of the rook, and also can't be captured by the queen because of the mate on f2. So white has to block. We pick up the knight and we bring in the rook. And all of black's pieces are working hard and strong to go for white's king. This is a completely lost position. There are several ways of winning. The easiest one is to sacrifice the queen and to play f3, where now pawn takes pawn, picks up the rook because of the check. So that was not possible. White played king to d2 and resigned after f2 with the idea f1. A crushing defeat, an unbelievably strong and potent performance by Tin Jingyao. Before I leave you guys, I wanted to bring up the poster of the Abu Dhabi. And I think this is definitely a tournament that we should consider going to play maybe at some point in our careers. These tournaments in Emirates are very nicely run. I've been to Dubai before, and I hope to spend a couple of days in Doha very soon. And what I've seen from these countries is very nice. They organize very nice tournaments. They're very strong tournaments. So if you want to conserve your rating, best not to go there. They're full of young Asian prodigies. But then again, it's an opportunity to do a nice trip to somewhere exotic, but which has a very good reputation. Both Abu Dhabi and Dubai are very nice places to be. I hope you've enjoyed this game, and if you have, please leave me a commentary below and leave me a like on the channel. And if you haven't, please subscribe to the channel, completely free, and it helps me to grow. And in the next days, I'll be bringing more games from the Abu Dhabi Chess Masters Festival. Take care, see you soon on the boards.